She fought for her granddaughter's custody in court, but a shocking and unexpected truth was revealed that day, changing their lives forever. She fought for her granddaughter's custody in court, but a shocking and unexpected truth was revealed that day, changing their lives forever. Arthur and Sophie Turner were the perfect example of a happy and loving couple. They lived in a cozy house surrounded by a beautiful garden where they spent weekends playing with their 8-year-old daughter, Amy, a girl full of life and joy. Arthur worked as a civil engineer, and Sophie was an art teacher at the local school. The family's routine was peaceful and filled with special moments. One Saturday afternoon, Arthur and Sophie decided to take Amy to visit some friends who lived out of town. Amy was excited, carrying with her a drawing she had made for the family friends. The sky was cloudy, and a light rain began to fall, but it did not diminish Amy's joy. "I think it's going to rain heavily, dear. We should take an umbrella," Sophie said as she fastened Amy's seatbelt in the back seat. "Good idea, love. Better safe than sorry," Arthur replied with a smile, grabbing an umbrella and placing it in the trunk. The trip started peacefully, with Arthur driving carefully on the wet road. Inside the car, the family chatted cheerfully about their weekend plans. Amy, her eyes shining with enthusiasm, told funny stories from school, making her parents laugh. Suddenly, the rain began to pour down harder. The sound of raindrops hitting the car increased, and Arthur reduced his speed to ensure safety. However, a sharp curve and a deep puddle changed everything in an instant. The car skidded uncontrollably, and Arthur struggled to maintain control. "Arthur, watch out!" Sophie screamed, gripping her seat tightly. The car spun on the road, crashing violently into a tree by the roadside. The sound of the impact was deafening, followed by absolute silence. Inside the car, the scene was devastating. Arthur and Sophie were unconscious while Amy, injured and frightened, cried desperately, "Help! Someone, please help us!" Amy screamed, her voice almost drowned out by the storm. Shortly after, paramedics and firefighters arrived at the scene. Amy was carefully removed from the car and taken to the ambulance where she received first aid. The professionals did everything they could to save Arthur and Sophie, but their efforts were in vain. Amy, in shock, watched the scene without fully understanding what was happening. At the hospital, Amy was treated for her physical injuries, but the emotional trauma was deep. The news of her parents' death devastated her, leaving her lost and alone. The only person who could provide her with some comfort was her grandmother, Thelma, who quickly came to the hospital to get her granddaughter. Thelma, a 68-year-old woman, arrived at the hospital with a heavy heart. She found Amy in her room, sitting on the bed with tears in her eyes. Thelma approached slowly, trying to maintain her composure. "Amy, dear, I'm here," Thelma said, her voice breaking. Amy looked up and ran into her grandmother's arms, crying intensely. "Grandma, Mommy and Daddy are gone. What will I do without them?" Thelma held Amy tightly, tears streaming down her face. "We will get through this together, my dear. You are not alone. I will take care of you." And so, in that hospital, Thelma's difficult journey to care for Amy and help her overcome the trauma of losing her parents began. The road would be long and full of challenges, but Thelma was determined to give her granddaughter all the love and support she could. After the accident, Thelma took on the responsibility of caring for Amy. The move to her grandmother's house was a significant adjustment for the girl, but Thelma was determined to do her best to provide a loving and stable environment for her granddaughter. Thelma was a strong and loving woman. At 68, she had retired from her job as a seamstress but remained active, selling homemade jams to supplement her income. Her house was small but cozy, with a well-tended garden where she grew fruits for her jams. Every corner of the house reflected the care with which Thelma took care of everything. "Let's arrange your room, Amy. I want you to feel comfortable here, Thelma said, helping Amy unpack her things. They placed photos of Arthur and Sophie in a prominent place, trying to keep their presence alive in their memories. The first weeks were difficult. Amy had frequent nightmares and woke up crying, scared and disoriented. Thelma spent nights by her granddaughter's side, holding her hand and singing old lullabies she used to sing to Sophie when she was little. I know it hurts, dear, but we are together, and we will get through this, Thelma said, trying to comfort Amy. During the day, Thelma tried to maintain a structured routine for Amy. They had breakfast together, and Thelma accompanied Amy to school. Despite the sadness, Amy tried to adapt, but it was evident that the absence of her parents weighed heavily on her heart. Thelma also actively participated in Amy's school meetings. She wanted to ensure her granddaughter received the necessary support to continue her education. In the meetings, she talked to the teachers about Amy's performance and asked for guidance on how to help her deal with the trauma. We are here to help, Mrs. Turner. We know Amy is going through a tough time, but we will do everything we can to support her, Amy's teacher said, trying to reassure Thelma. On weekends, Thelma and Amy spent time together in the garden. They played, took care of the plants, and explored the surrounding nature. Thelma told stories from her past, sharing memories of Sophie and teaching valuable life lessons. Your dad used to have picnics here with us. He loved climbing that tree, Thelma said, pointing to a large tree in the garden. Amy looked with interest, trying to imagine the happy moments her grandmother described. Additionally, Thelma involved Amy in the preparation of homemade jams. Together, they picked fruits from the garden and spent hours in the kitchen cooking and bottling the jams. Amy loved to help, and the activity became a way for them to connect and find moments of happiness amidst the sadness. Grandma, can I stir the pot today? Amy asked with a shy smile. Of course, dear. But be careful, it's hot, Thelma replied, handing the spoon to her granddaughter. Despite the happy moments, financial difficulties were a constant concern for Thelma. Her pension was not enough to cover all expenses, and the jam sales, though helpful, did not meet all their needs. Thelma did her best to stretch every penny, but knew she was just managing to keep things in balance. Amy, despite the trauma, showed impressive resilience. Gradually, she began to open her heart to new friendships at school and feel more secure beside her grandmother. But in moments of silence, the longing for her parents still haunted her. I will never forget Mommy and Daddy, Grandma, Amy said, looking at the photos. And you don't have to, dear. They will always be with us in our hearts and in the memories we share, Thelma replied, caressing Amy's face. The road was long and full of challenges, but Thelma was determined to offer Amy as much love and security as possible. Grandmother and granddaughter were united by pain and love, finding strength in each other to move forward. Weeks passed, and slowly Amy began to adapt to the new routine with her grandmother Thelma. Life was tough, but there were moments of joy and hope. However, like any journey, there were moments of crisis that tested their strength. One morning, Thelma woke up feeling unusually weak. A severe headache bothered her, and her body felt heavy. She tried to ignore the symptoms and follow her usual routine, but as the day progressed, her condition worsened. Grandma, are you okay? Amy asked, concerned, seeing Thelma sitting on the couch, breathless. I'm just a little tired, dear. I'll rest a bit and we'll be fine, Thelma replied, trying not to alarm Amy. However, in the afternoon, Thelma worsened and could not get out of bed. Amy, scared, tried to take care of her grandmother as best as she could but knew she needed help. The girl went to the neighbor's house, Margaret Jenkins, a kind woman who had always been close to the family. Mrs. Jenkins, please, Grandma is sick and can't get out of bed. Can you help us? Amy pleaded, her eyes full of tears. Margaret didn't hesitate. Of course, Amy. I'll take care of your grandmother. Don't worry. The neighbor ran to Thelma's house and, seeing the seriousness of the situation, called an ambulance. Thelma was taken to the hospital, where she was diagnosed with a severe infection that required immediate treatment. During the days Thelma was hospitalized, Margaret offered to take care of Amy, ensuring she had a safe place to stay. She helped Amy with her schoolwork and took her to visit Thelma at the hospital every day. "You are a very brave girl, Amy. Your grandmother will be fine. She just needs time to recover," Margaret said, trying to comfort the girl. After a week of intensive treatment, Thelma began to recover. Although still weak, the doctors allowed her to return home on the condition that she rested and followed a medication routine. Back home, Thelma was moved to see Amy and Margaret waiting for her. "Thank you, Margaret, for taking care of Amy. I don't know what I would have done without your help," Thelma said, holding her neighbor's hand. "No need to thank me, Thelma. I'm happy to help. You two are like family to me," Margaret replied with a warm smile. Despite the relief of having Thelma back home, the crisis left its marks. Amy was even more attached to her grandmother, fearing losing her too. Thelma, in turn, worried about the incident's impact on their life stability with Amy. "Grandma, you're going to be okay now, right?" Amy asked, lying next to Thelma. "I will, dear. I promise to take care of myself so I can take care of you," Thelma replied with determination. However, the episode did not go unnoticed by the authorities. The knowledge of Thelma's difficulties caught the attention of Child Protective Services. Although well-intentioned, these concerns triggered a deeper investigation into Thelma's ability to care for Amy. The days following Thelma's return from the hospital were filled with recovery and reflection. Although still weak, Thelma was determined to resume her routine and care for Amy with all the love she had. However, the health crisis did not go unnoticed by the authorities, and soon Child Protective Services began investigating the situation. One morning, while Thelma and Amy were having breakfast, they heard a knock on the door. Thelma got up slowly and went to answer. At the door was a social worker from Child Protective Services accompanied by a police officer. "Good morning, Mrs. Turner. I'm social worker Karen Miller from Child Protective Services. We received a report about your recent hospitalization and would like to talk to you and check on things," Karen said in a professional but kind tone. Thelma felt a chill but remained calm. "Sure, come in. Let's talk in the living room," she said, guiding them inside. While Amy watched from the kitchen, Thelma sat with Karen and the police officer. "I understand you're concerned. I went through a health crisis, but I'm recovering well now. Amy is being well taken care of," Thelma explained, trying to reassure them. Karen looked around the house, observing the conditions. "We are here to ensure that Amy is in a safe and stable environment. We know that Mrs. Jenkins helped during your hospitalization. How are things now?" Thelma sighed. "Margaret was a great help, and we are getting back to our normal routine. I have my challenges, but I always put Amy's well-being first." Despite Thelma's words, Karen noted the financial difficulties and Thelma's fragility. "We understand, Mrs. Turner, but we need to ensure that Amy is in a safe environment in the long term. We will initiate a more detailed evaluation process." In the days that followed, social workers made several visits, observing Thelma and Amy's routine. They noted the financial and emotional difficulties Thelma faced and the efforts she made to care for her granddaughter. Child Protective Services concerns grew, leading them to initiate the process of removing Amy from Thelma's custody. An initial hearing was scheduled to decide the matter. Thelma, frightened but determined, attended the court accompanied by Margaret, who was there to support her friend. In court, the Child Protective Services lawyer presented arguments, highlighting Thelma's advanced age, financial difficulties, and recent health problems as reasons to consider her custody of Amy inadequate. Her recent health condition shows that Mrs. Turner, although well-intentioned, may not be able to provide the stable and safe environment that Amy needs, argued the Child Protective Services lawyer. Thelma, with tears in her eyes, made her statement to the court. "I love my granddaughter more than anything in this world. I know we have difficulties, but I am determined to care for her. Please don't take her away from me." Despite Thelma's emotional words, Judge Dalton Mason, after considering all the evidence and testimonies, decided in favor of Child Protective Services. "Based on the information presented, I decide that Amy's custody should be transferred to a temporary foster home while we continue to monitor the situation." Amy was taken to a temporary foster home, leaving Thelma devastated. She returned home with Margaret, feeling an immense void. "I will fight for Amy, Margaret. I will not give up on her," Thelma said, determined to find a way to reverse the decision. "We are with you, Thelma. We will find a way to bring Amy back home," Margaret replied, holding her friend's hand firmly. The days following Amy's removal from Thelma's custody were bleak for Thelma. Her home, once vibrant with her granddaughter's joyful presence, now felt empty and silent. Amy's smile, her laughter, and even her little pranks were immensely missed. Every corner of the house reminded Thelma of her granddaughter, and the absence was a constant weight on her heart. Thelma tried to maintain her routine, but nothing was the same. Preparing breakfast alone without Amy's company became a painful task. The nights were the worst. Thelma stayed awake, worried about Amy's well-being, imagining how the girl was adapting to the new home. The loneliness and sadness were deep, and Thelma felt lost, not knowing how to move forward. One day, while in the kitchen preparing a batch of her homemade jams, Thelma heard the doorbell ring. It was one of her regular customers, Grace Mitchell, a kind woman who always came to buy jams. "Hello, Thelma. How are you today?" Grace asked with a warm smile. Thelma tried to smile, but the sadness in her eyes was evident. "Hello, Grace. I'm holding on. And you?" "I'm fine, thank you. I came to get a few more jars of jam. You know, those strawberry ones you make are my husband's favorites," Grace replied, trying to cheer up the conversation. As Thelma fetched the jars of jam, Grace looked around and noticed Amy's absence. "Thelma, I haven't seen Amy around lately. Is she all right?" Thelma paused for a moment, trying to hold back tears. "Grace, I lost custody of Amy. Child Protective Services decided that I am not capable of caring for her because of my financial and health difficulties. They took her to a temporary foster home." Grace was shocked. "Oh, Thelma, I'm so sorry. This is terrible. Amy must be missing you so much." Thelma nodded, tears streaming down her face. "She is everything to me, Grace. I don't know what to do without her." Grace held Thelma's hand, trying to comfort her. "Thelma, I know a lawyer who can help. His name is James Lambert. He is very competent and has a big heart. Let me write down his number for you." Grace took a piece of paper and a pen from her bag, writing down James Lambert's number. "Call him, Thelma. Tell him I recommended him. I'm sure he will do everything he can to help." Thelma took the paper with gratitude. "Thank you, Grace. I will contact him. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me, Thelma. We are all rooting for you and Amy. Stay strong," Grace said before saying goodbye and leaving the house. Later that same day, Thelma picked up the phone with trembling hands and dialed the number written on the paper. After a few rings, a male voice answered. "James Lambert's office. Good afternoon." "Good afternoon. My name is Thelma Turner. Grace Mitchell gave me your number. I need help with a case involving my granddaughter," Thelma said, her voice filled with hope. "Of course, Mrs. Turner. Mr. Lambert is available for a consultation tomorrow. Can you come to the office at 10 a.m.? "Yes, I'll be there." "Thank you very much," Thelma replied, feeling a glimmer of hope. The next day, Thelma arrived at James Lambert's office, a welcoming and professional place. James, a friendly-looking man with a compassionate gaze, greeted her with a smile. "Mrs. Turner, it's a pleasure to meet you. Grace told me about your situation. Please, Have a seat and tell me everything." Thelma told her story, from the tragic accident that took the lives of her daughter and son-in-law to the recent court decision to take away her custody of Amy. James listened attentively, taking notes and occasionally asking questions. "I understand, Mrs. Turner. Your situation is indeed difficult, but I am here to help. We will work together to appeal this decision. We need to gather all the evidence and testimonies that show you are capable of caring for Amy." Thelma felt a wave of relief. "Thank you, Mr. Lambert. I don't know what I would do without your help." "We will bring Amy back home," James replied with determination. The days following the initial consultation with James Lambert were intense and emotional. Thelma felt a new hope, but also knew that the legal battle would be tough. With James' help, she began gathering evidence and testimonies that would show the court her capability to care for Amy. James was tireless in preparing the case. He visited Thelma's home several times, checking every detail that could be used in her defense. He also spoke to Amy's friends, neighbors, and teachers who were willing to testify in favor of Thelma. "We will need all the testimonies we can get, Mrs. Turner. Every person who can speak about your love and dedication to Amy will be crucial," James said during one of his visits. Thelma nodded, determined. "I will do whatever it takes, Mr. Lambert. Amy is my life." One of the most emotional moments was when Margaret Jenkins, Thelma's neighbor, offered to testify. "Thelma is an incredible woman. I have seen how much she cares for Amy with love and dedication. I will tell the judge that," Margaret said, holding Thelma's hand firmly. Meanwhile, Amy was being well treated in her temporary foster home but deeply missed her grandmother. The supervised visits were both joyous and painful, with Amy always asking when she could return home. "Grandma, I want to go home with you. Promise you will bring me back?" Amy asked, tears in her eyes. "I promise, my dear. I am doing everything I can to bring you back home," Thelma replied, trying to hide her own tears. The day of the second hearing finally arrived. Thelma, accompanied by James and surrounded by the support of Margaret and other friends, entered the courtroom with a racing heart. She knew everything depended on that moment. In court, Judge Dalton Mason opened the session, and the Child Protective Services lawyer began presenting their arguments. "Your Honor, while we understand Mrs. Turner's love for her granddaughter, we believe her advanced age and recent health issues make her unable to provide a stable and safe environment for Amy." James Lambert then stood up with confidence. "Your Honor, we have several witnesses who can attest to the contrary. Mrs. Turner is a dedicated and loving woman, and her community is willing to support her. Let's hear these witnesses." Margaret Jenkins was the first to testify. "I have seen firsthand the love and care Thelma has for Amy. During Thelma's health crisis, I helped care for Amy and can affirm that this child needs her grandmother." Other witnesses followed, including Amy's teachers and neighbors, all praising Thelma's dedication and love. The most emotional testimony came from Amy's teacher, Mrs. Johnson, who spoke about how Amy thrived under her grandmother's care. Since she started living with her grandmother, Amy has shown incredible progress at school. She is a smart and loved girl, and all this is due to the safe and loving environment Thelma provides, Mrs. Johnson said, emotional. After the testimonies, Judge Mason called for a recess to consider the evidence. Thelma, James, and all the supporters waited anxiously in the courtroom hallway. The tension was palpable, and Thelma held Margaret's and James' hands, seeking strength. Finally, Judge Mason returned to the courtroom. "After considering all the evidence and testimonies, I decide to reassess my previous decision. However, I would like to hear Amy's opinion before making a final decision. Mr. Lambert, could you bring Amy to the courtroom?" James nodded and quickly arranged for Amy to be brought. When Amy entered the room, her eyes met Thelma's, and she ran into her grandmother's arms. Judge Mason looked at Amy with a gentle gaze. "Amy, I know this is difficult for you, but I would like to know how you feel living with your grandmother. Would you like to share that with us?" Amy, with tears in her eyes, held Thelma's hand tightly. She looked around, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on her. With a trembling voice, she began to speak. "I love my grandma. She takes care of me, makes me feel safe and loved. I miss my parents so much, and sometimes I'm afraid she will leave too. But I know she is always here for me. She is the only family I have left. Please don't take me away from her. I've already lost my parents. I don't want to lose my grandma too." Amy looked at the judge with pleading eyes, tears rolling down her face. "I promise I will be strong and help my grandma, but please let me stay with her. I don't know what I would do without her." The courtroom fell silent as Amy's words echoed through the room. Judge Mason, visibly moved by the girl's sincerity and emotion, reflected deeply. "Amy, your words are very important to me. The decision to remove custody from a family member is not one I take lightly. Considering everything I have heard today, I decide that Amy should return to live with her grandmother, Thelma Turner. However, Mrs. Turner will receive ongoing support from social services to ensure both can thrive together." Tears of relief and joy flooded Thelma's eyes. She hugged Amy tightly, feeling indescribable happiness. James smiled, satisfied with the outcome, and Margaret couldn't hold back tears of joy. "Let's go home, my dear," Thelma said, holding Amy firmly. "Let's go home." Years passed since that decisive day in court. Amy, now 17, had grown into a responsible and loving young woman. The time spent with Thelma had shaped her character and strengthened the bond between them. Thelma, though older and with frailer health, remained a constant and inspiring presence in Amy's life. Amy had grown up under Thelma's attentive care, becoming a dedicated student and a compassionate person. Now, she was the one helping her grandmother with various tasks, ensuring Thelma received all the care and affection she had given years before. One afternoon, while Amy helped Thelma prepare jams in the kitchen, her grandmother looked at her with eyes full of pride and gratitude. "You have become a wonderful young woman, Amy. I am so lucky to have you as my granddaughter," Thelma said with a tender smile. Amy returned the smile, feeling deeply grateful for everything her grandmother had done for her. "I'm the lucky one, Grandma. You sacrificed so much for me. I will never forget how hard you fought for us to stay together." The days of preparing jams were special moments for both of them. Thelma taught Amy all the secrets of the recipe, and Amy was always eager to learn more, ensuring the tradition continued. Besides household chores and jam preparation, Amy also excelled at school. She was about to graduate from high school with plans to study nursing. Inspired by her grandmother's dedication and the desire to care for others, Amy wanted to pursue a career where she could make a difference. "I want to be a nurse, Grandma. I want to take care of people just like you took care of me," Amy said one night while they were having dinner together. Thelma felt a surge of pride and emotion. "I'm sure you will be an excellent nurse, Amy. You have a big heart and a kind soul. I am very proud of you." The years brought many challenges, but also countless joys. The local bakery continued to sell Thelma's homemade jams, and Amy helped with the sales, keeping the family tradition alive. The community, always supportive, treated them with affection and respect. In their moments of rest, Amy and Thelma enjoyed sitting in the garden, reminiscing about the past and dreaming about the future. "Do you remember when we started making jams together? You were so little," Thelma said, laughing softly. "I remember, Grandma, and I still love those moments. They taught me so much about love and resilience," Amy replied, holding her grandmother's hand. As Thelma aged, Amy was always by her side, caring for her with the same dedication she had received. She knew that one day Thelma would pass, but until then, she would do everything to repay the love and care her grandmother had provided. "I will take care of you, Grandma, until the end," You gave me everything, and now it's my turn to be here for you," Amy said, tears in her eyes during one of those conversations in the garden. Thelma smiled, feeling blessed to have such a wonderful granddaughter. "And you gave me the greatest joy of my life, Amy. Watching you grow and become this incredible person is all I could have wished for." As the years went by, Amy continued to care for Thelma, always grateful for the sacrifice and unconditional love her grandmother had shown. And so, surrounded by love and gratitude, they lived together, strengthened by the indestructible bond that united them. The story of Thelma and Amy is a testament to the power of love and resilience. Despite the adversities, they found strength in each other, proving that true love can overcome any obstacle and that mutual gratitude and care are the greatest gifts we can give to those we love. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment, and check out our next story.